Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about a recap of season 5, which we just finished last week. So, yeah, here we are.
That is correct. This is just going to be a complete recap of the episode, some of our, highs and lows, main takeaways, thoughts, opinions, so forth and so on. Kind of just, yeah, just bringing it all together and giving us kind of a story so far before we move into the sixth season of this great show. You can, of course, find us and follow us anywhere you happen to do your social medias, and you can watch us live like you're doing right now on YouTube, of course. So yeah, as David said, we're going to be doing this recap. As I said, we're going to be doing this recap. But before we do that, let's recap our weeks. So David, how's your week been?
Week's been fine. Nothing new really for me. Just been enjoying that game I mentioned the last couple weeks. I think I might be done with it by this time next week. We'll see. Um, yeah, my sister flew in for Mother's Day, which is tomorrow, which is also my mom's birthday. My mom's birthday falls on Mother's Day pretty regularly, and she made it a little secret. She didn't tell my mom she was coming. My mom was the last weekend. She's like, "Oh yeah, your sister can't be here for my birthday," and I was just like, "Ooh, ooh, can't say anything." um, and yeah, other than that, things are kind of normal. How about you?
Things are pretty steady here. Work is going pretty well. I love working from home, and I'm never going to give that up. As long as I can hold on to it, I will stay work from home. I finally got everything worked out for us with our episodes and the website, and getting all the stuff released. So we should be all caught up. If you've been listening or wanting to listen to the episodes while you're, driving, or you listen to stuff at work or whatever it is you do, you can now find all the episodes on whatever platform that you typically do your podcast from, like I do it on Spotify, for example. Of course, those of you who've been watching us live, you didn't have any problems because the live stuff happens instantly, right away. But I was really glad to get that worked out. It did turn out to be, like I said in the previous episode, where it all just kind of came out in a rush. So it did cause some issues because the episodes are obviously numbered, but they were disorganized. So I had to go in and fix that, but no big deal. I'm just glad that everything is now all caught up. And even this episode will be available within 24 hours of us getting done here. So yeah,
Gotcha.
we'll be actually be ahead of the curve a little bit.
Okay.
So basically, David, wink, wink. This would be the time to take a vacation because we're all caught up. If you wanted to go somewhere or do something. Oh man. But yeah, other than that, we're doing well. I have had to back off a little bit from my workouts, the training and stuff for the strongman stuff. I just kind of got caught up in doing some other things, and then I've been dealing with some never-ending joint issues. My right knee, in particular, has
No.
been an issue, and I'm trying to get that sorted. So it's kind of like going back to the drawing board a little bit on training because it's like once I hit a certain weight, my knees really just kind of flare up, you know. So I'm trying to figure out some things I can do for that. I've got some interesting rehab stuff that I've been informed about that I'm going to be trying over the next couple of weeks. So we'll see if that actually does anything for me there, because I would hate to have to hang up the dream or retire the goal before I ever really get the chance to hit it because of knee issues. Now, I mean, I knew I was going to have knee issues. It was told to me a long time ago because I'm so tall, and played sports for so long. But hopefully, this rehab stuff that I'm getting ready to start doing will help out. So we will see.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um, yeah, other than that, we're all good. So let's go ahead and jump into our recap here of season 5. We had some great moments, excellent moments in storytelling here. This is a season that really gives us just a lot of extra stuff. Not, and I don't mean that in the way of like filler. It's a lot of great things to help kind of fill in the lore of Trek and establish a lot of things about characters here. And these are the things that, as you'll come to find out later on, are those long-standing traits of characters that we see play out in in multiple franchises when they get references and so forth. So let's just go ahead and start that by going all the way back to the beginning of season 5 and talk
Mhm.
about our great kind of our first real complex storyline episode, which was
Yeah.
Eclipse Rising.
Yeah.
So quick recap here. That episode was all it was kind of our answering of the cliffhanger from season 4. Of course, Odo had been recently turned into a humanoid. There was a suspicion that somebody in the Klingon higher ranks was a changeling. All signs pointed to Gowron, and Cisco and his senior officers were now tasked with exposing him.
Right.
They go to this high echelon meeting of the Klingons to try to expose him. They get sidetracked by Martok, and ultimately it's revealed that Martok is the changeling, not Gowron, and that the
Yeah.
whole plot was thought up really by the Dominion, by the founders. They used Odo to plant this seed,
Mhm.
false information, to basically get the Federation to do their dirty work and eliminate the leader of the Klingon people.
Right.
And they sorely doubted Odo, as Gowron says towards the end of that episode.
Right.
Uh, so, in going back to that episode, in comparison to what you've seen so far of Trek, and now that we're at the end of the season, how do you think that was? How do you feel about that start of the episode? Did this kind of have any kind of big impact for you? When you think about other Trek that you've watched, was this kind of the better start to a season that you've seen? Yeah, what were your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think we'll remember both of us really liking that episode. It was really good. Great twist. It was Gowron they were thinking was the changeling. It made sense it would be Gowron. They had planted that, seed, both the idea in the audience and with our group that, yeah, Gowron was the one being replaced because the changelings can pick anybody. When it turns out to be Martok, it was a great twist. It was a subtle twist. Now, I believe it's Odo who realizes that Martok is a
Yes,
changeling, right? Yes.
it is
Um,
Odo. Hmm.
yeah, and I don't remember exactly now what it is about his interpretation of Martok that was incorrect, and therefore
I do.
remind
So
me. Yeah,
what happened there was simply that when they decided to go, when they had to challenge Gowron, Gowron did not back down from the challenge. He didn't have his guard step in and shoot Worf and Cisco and the rest of them.
right,
And everybody else was crowding around and watching the fight as Worf and Gowron started to battle it out. And Martok, who was watching from afar, got very upset and was very impatient. He was like, why don't they just shoot them? Why doesn't he take out his phaser and shoot him? Why are they dealing with this honor nonsense? And Odo's like, that's a very atypical Klingon attitude
response.
to have, because that's something that my people would want to do. We're all about the efficiency, get it over with, do whatever. They wouldn't be bound by honor codes, and so the more he pestered Martok, the more Martok kind of gave it away. But that was the first inkling there, was because Martok wanted them to just end it quickly rather than being one of the many typical Klingons enjoying the honor battle that was going
Right.
on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that I've said it before. I'll say it again. The fact that I like the Klingon culture, I like Klingon characters, is the greatest success Star Trek has had for me personally. Getting me invested in this completely alien group of people who act in what seem like barbaric ways, but that they've made it make sense. They've made it honorable. There's a ritualistic nature to it that kind of makes sense.
Hmm.
I mean, it is alien still, but it's an alienness that you can appreciate. And so that episode really highlights it because we have Cisco, Odo, and O'Brien, if I remember correctly, all
Hmm.
dressing up like Klingons and infiltrating for this meeting. And we mentioned that Dax was an obvious miss. Like Dax would have been a great pick
Yeah.
there. Odo looked funny, because he didn't look he was intentionally, or the changelings had intentionally left him with his changeling face, even though he was humanoid. And so when he went in for the surgery, looked like a Klingon. He looked like a Klingon, but when he came back out, he still looked like a changeling. And he said, "Yeah, I still want my normal face," which was an interesting choice, I thought at the time. But I was glad they mentioned it. Um, but yeah, and of course, Martok is a character we had introduced back in season 4, but
Yes.
this is the season where he becomes an important one of those side characters that regularly gets brought up now more and
Hmm.
more. And again, Klingons are great. To actually have Worf has always been that awkward position. He is a Klingon, but he grew up in with humans on Earth. He is this kind of fish out of water type story. Martok is Klingon, man. There's no hesitation there. And so it's going to be some time before we find the real Martok, of course. But later this season, when the real Martok joins our cast in a guest role every now and then, he is an important character to regularly come back up because he is the central connection between the Klingon Empire and the Federation as they reconnect their relations in the
Hmm.
face of the Dominion threat. So yeah, great episode, great start. Blood wine, we got to see how
Got to
blood
see
wine
it.
really
Yeah.
affects the Klingons. Great episode, great start to this season.
So it's interesting that you mentioned how Martok is kind of our de facto connection to the Klingon Empire and the Federation. He also becomes that for Worf. Again, you mentioned Worf has basically been the ultimate outsider. You know, he's an outsider from the Federation, from human culture. He also stands apart from his own people. He's always been very different and atypical of other Klingons that we see, but we also see here this friendship, this bond that forms between him and Martok. Obviously, it helps when you spend however long that was they spent together in the prison camp battling things out with the Jem'Hadar. But when they come through that on the other side of it, Martok Worf has earned Martok's respect, so much so that Martok includes him into his house. Um,
Yep.
I always found this very interesting because of the fact that for the longest time, Worf has been on the outskirts of Klingon culture. He's kind of been this, um, I think we've said this before, he's kind of like a distilled down version of his people because he had to learn about them from afar. He did not grow up in the culture. He wasn't instinctively aware of the colloquialisms and the folklore and the things. He had to learn about that stuff because his parents were human and they were far removed. And, he even talked about the few times when he did go back to the home world, how alien things seemed to him and how he was treated as strange by his relatives that were there, because he was raised by humans.
Right.
So he had this very idealized version of what Klingon honor should be, and he
Right.
tried to live by that,
Hmm.
and that kept him even into adulthood. That kept him on the outskirts of Klingon culture society. So to ultimately come all the way back around to now, you have earned not just the admiration and respect of a Klingon, but of General Martok, who is for us, especially for how they portray him and prop him up here in season 4 and on into season 5 and so forth. He is
Hmm.
like he's our Klingon. He is our guy, and you can't
Right.
help but love Martok. You like the guy. Yes, in
Yeah.
his first meeting he was very gruff, but you like the guy. And for
Yeah.
him to welcome Worf as much as he did, I really love that. Really love seeing that dynamic
Well,
here in
what I
the
really
season.
like about Martok in particular is he is as a grizzled curmudgeonly type. He isn't the most of the Klingons, especially the younger Klingons, are hot-headed, rebellious, violent for violence sake. But Martok, it makes sense he's a general because he knows how to channel all that energy, not only his own but his men's. Um, we see that come out in that episode later this season. I guess we'll just hit all the Martok scenes for
Yeah,
now because we're talking about him.
we're talking about him. Go ahead.
Yeah. Later on in this season, we have the episode where he and Worf take a ship out, and he asks Worf to be his first officer. That's also the end of the episode where he gives Worf his medallion. What is the house
The
symbol?
house crest. Yes, he
Is
he
that
inducts him into the house.
that's the end of that episode, if I remember correctly. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right at the end.
Yeah. So anyway, my point is that he knows that he's in this awkward position with his men about feeling like going into Dominion or into to Cardassian space with the Dominion there. That like he doesn't want to risk things. Worf has to confront him, but at no point, but he is aware that he is struggling with what to do next. Worf has to push him to make the right decision, which of course is a classic Worf thing. He has to sacrifice his reputation
Yes.
and everything for someone
That
else's sake. But
that is one Star Trek trope that, they never got tired of.
yeah,
Worf having to humble himself or to
right,
make himself appear weaker or less than when really he was at least to our distinction, he was the more honorable of the two.
right,
Because that situation on that ship, that episode is called Soldiers of the Empire, by the way. That could have played out a lot differently. As the first officer, Worf was well within his rights to kill Martok and
yes,
take over as captain.
right,
But rather than doing that, he believed in his friend. He trusted his friend, and he wanted
right,
to help his friend. So he gave him an opportunity to redeem himself, even though, as he stated at the end of the episode, it could have cost him his life to do so. But he was willing to
right,
sacrifice himself for the benefit of Martok, and that is why Martok inducted him into his house.
right. Yeah. Um, so yeah, that the Worf Martok angle really gets built up a bit in this season, starting with, of course, the first episode. Again, it's a changeling pretending to be him. But yeah, well, let's go. We can go to the point where Worf is captured with who is he captured with? He's captured with
Garrick.
Garrick,
Yes.
and they
He is
find that
captured with
Doc
Garrick, and Dr. Bashir and Anabra Tain, as well as Martok, are all in this holding cell.
right, because it
And
turns out that Bashir has been replaced by a changeling. He's been
mhm.
replaced far enough back that he hadn't got the upgrade in the
Yeah,
outfits.
yeah, the new uniforms. He was
That's
still
how we
he
knew.
was still wearing season 4, I guess, early season
Yeah.
4 uniforms.
Well, it's
So,
partway through season 5 that we get the upgrade to the new outfits, the new uniforms, which
mhm,
also coincided with First Contact, the
mhm.
next generation Borg infiltration episode or movie that is. So yeah, we got to see Martok back in person in that episode, and that's about halfway through the season, if I remember correctly. Does that sound about right to you?
That episode where we find out about the Bashir changeling?
Yes, because that's a
Yeah.
two-parter, if I
Yeah,
remember
that's
correctly.
the In Purgatory Shadow episode. So this
Right,
is where we get they get into more of the storytelling. So we don't get a part 1 and part 2. It's the first episode was called something else, and then the next episode that follows it up is In Purgatory Shadow.
right.
So, this is where they're getting into the, kind of like a chapter would be the way to view this. Here was chapter 1, here's chapter 2 instead of part 1, part 2, in their storytelling.
Yeah, in
Um,
Purgatory's Shadow and by Inferno's Light, right?
mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Um,
Getting so
so
poetic here with Deep Space Nine, not just the Descent Part One, the Descent Part Two. It's Inferno's Light and Purgatory's Shadow, and trying to make you think of what these whimsical terms and phrases may mean. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, and that's a two-parter. That's an important one because we've not only has Dr. Bashir been replaced, but the fake Bashir is does he try and close the wormhole? Is that what he first tries to do? He
he
tries to
tries to blow up the Bajoran sun, which would have effectively knocked out the wormhole, but also they had been sending the founders have been sending false information, and so the Klingons and the Federation were massing a fleet at Deep Space Nine to kind of head off what they thought was an incoming threat. But
right.
it turns out all of that was false information, and if the fleets had all drawn to Deep Space Nine and the Changeling Bashir had been successful, they would have wiped out the fleet and really crippled both the Federation and the Klingon Empire, who were the two main opposing
Antagonistic
forces
threats
for
to the yeah,
to the Dominion. Yeah.
right. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because that's obviously very important. Goal in Auburn Tane is revealed to be Garrick's father. It's been kind of hinted at, kind of suggested. Maybe he was more like an
Hmm.
adoptive father or mentor type figure, but no, he's actually a Garrick's father. Um, that was an interesting reveal. We let's see, what else did we find out? So,
We're gonna come
um,
back to this episode because I know we're talking about Martok right now, but in
right,
Purgatory Shadow is a very important episode, and it reveals a lot about Garrick as well. And Andrew Robinson gives an incredible performance in that episode. So we will be back to
right.
that. But let's stay on our Martok train here it's because it's a very important distinction here.
Yeah,
And Worf is one of those characters. I mean, he's literally a generational character. He started on Next Generation. Now here he is on Deep Space Nine. He later comes back for all the various movies. He's in the new show Star Trek Picard, a legendary character. He's the character's been in more episodes of Trek than any other character in the Star Trek franchise. So I mean, definitely a very important one. And it always bothered me how much of his story was a bittersweet story. There's so much struggle associated with this character who really is just looking for um I don't want to say just looking for acceptance, but he's looking for acceptance from his people. Like he wants to be accepted by other Klingons. He
right.
has acceptance and he has family clearly through the Federation. He's earned their respect. He's earned their loyalty, their dedication. So he's done all of that in spades. But when it comes to Klingons, he just can't seem to get that right to finally solidify that. And then we see that here finally with Martok. So um I just something that I've always really appreciated because the character of Worf and that struggle, I don't know why I have always just really kind of gravitated towards that. And it's again, bittersweet's the best word I can think about for it. And when you finally get to see him have some sort of satisfaction, you cheer for the guy. You're just really there for him for it. And so I was really glad when that moment happened. But all of that wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for Martok. And if their first interaction was any indication, that was the furthest thing that could have happened. Remember, the first time when Worf meets Martok, which is in the beginning of season 4, season 1, The Way of the Warrior, Martok comes in and demands that Worf gives him back his son's knife.
Yeah,
And if he doesn't do it, he's going to take it from him. He was angry. You
yeah.
know, Nothing
And he,
about that said one day we're going to be family. You
yeah.
know,
And doesn't he say, like he gives it to him, but he says something to, he's like, I just did it to get your attention, and now
Yeah,
you're
he was like,
here. So,
now that I have your attention, I no longer need it," and he gives it
yeah.
back to him. And
Yeah.
Martok's like, "What? Wait a minute! I
Yeah.
came in here ready to kick your ass, and now you're
Right.
telling me we're just gonna talk?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, let's see what else. What else? I mean, so we talked about the episode where he kind of loses face on with his crew, and so Worf has to kind of sacrifice himself for that. Um, Martok is in charge of the Klingon ship that's basically helping the Defiant at the end of the
Mhm.
season. It's the one that goes out to like check to make sure like when the Dominion fleet's coming. So
Mhm.
he's obviously helping bolster the frankly meager defenses that the poor station
Right.
has. Only
Well,
two ships.
and
Go
Martok
ahead.
Martok gets a promotion because of Worf. When they, when things kind of calm back down between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, they want an officer to serve as liaison between the two, and based on Worf's recommendation, Martok is the one who gets the job.
Right.
Cisco trusts Worf's decision or Worf's opinion.
Right.
Worf makes the recommendation, and yeah, they pass it along to Gowron, who's the chancellor, of course, who agrees. And remember, you know, Gowron had Martok slated as, the leader of the army. Next to him, he was basically Gowron's number one. You know, so for him to go and take this position, it shows that there was a lot of importance and power here for it. And Martok, he does a great job, and we get to see more of the Klingon dynamic because of him being here. So yeah, we learn a lot about Klingon culture throughout season 5, and we're going to learn even more as we get into seasons 6 and 7.
Oh, all
Deep
right.
Space Nine does a lot to really grow the Klingons, which is which makes what happens in Discovery, if you ever decide to watch that show, kind of makes that a bit of a letdown because there are a lot of things they do in Discovery that's just like, did you not forget what was? Did you all just clearly forget what was written 30 years ago, and just whatever? But yeah, that's one of my Discovery gripes, and we're not going to go there tonight. So just let y'all know, y'all.
We've heard some
Yeah,
of it. I'm
I was gonna say
sure we've
you.
talked
You,
about
you
it.
know,
Yeah,
I've got my gripes about the show. I love the show. I've also praised the show several times, but yeah,
we
we'll
fumbled there. Yeah,
save that for another time. Yeah, the Klingons
gotcha,
should have just been left alone.
gotcha.
Um, so I guess now, since we've kind of summed that up a little bit, we can circle back to Purgatory Shadow and Garrick, of course, in his command performance. Um, Andrew Robinson, given the command performance that is. I still love pointing out the fact that during that episode, Andrew Robinson, again, actor who plays Garrick, was incredibly sick. And he filmed all of his episodes with this full blown sickness. I don't remember if they said like if he had the flu or something, but anyway, he was very sick, and the actor is also um, quite claustrophobic. So this scene in which Garrick also suffers from claustrophobia was
Very personal.
quite intense and personal for him because he himself was suffering. But he can't. I mean, it worked beautifully. It worked beautifully. The sweating, the talking to himself, um, all of that just kind of pouring out of him into giving us some great scenes while Worf is out there getting um, putting Jem'Hadar on their backs,
Right.
as it were.
Yeah.
Anything that you would like to say about that particular episode in relation to Garrick?
I mean, again, we revealed that his father is an Auburn Tane. I don't know. Part of me thinks that the idea that he actually was his father almost kind of undermines the mystique a bit. It kind of undermines the he was my father mentor type. Having him be his actual physical father, you know, it just
Well,
smacks a little bit of Star Wars there.
in
Garrick, I
defense,
am your father.
in defense of Tane, he never admits that he's Garrick's father.
That's true. But Garrick
Because
says,
Garrick
"Can't you
says it.
just
Garrick
say it?"
says, At least now, father, will you admit that I'm your son?" And Tane speaks right up. He says, "You're not my son." And
Yeah.
he's like, basically, "Damn it, Dad. Yes, I am." And but yeah, he never admits it because the next thing that he says is I think he says, "I should have had you killed a long time ago. You got too close." Something like that is what he said. So yeah, he never admits that he's uh Garrick's father, but it
Right.
definitely is intimated there before he dies. So
Right.
but
Yeah.
Enabran Tain was a
Yeah.
great character. I just the whole spy mystique, and he's the leader of the Obsidian Order. I still love that name, the
Yeah.
Obsidian Order. I mean, it's
Well,
just
and his coup d'état of last season was trying to take that Klingon, or sorry, the not Vulcan,
Romulan.
Romulan Cardassian combined fleet into the Dominion territory and try and destroy the Changelings' homeworld, which has been already evacuated when they get there, and then they get decimated by the Dominion forces. Um, and the Dominion have how does that scene go? The Dominion have um, a Romulan looking guy
Mhm.
allow Garrick to escape, or no, Odo to escape. That's what it
So yeah,
was.
he allowed Odo to escape, but he let Garrick go
Garrick,
with Odo because Odo was not going
right?
to leave without Garrick. And
That's what it was.
yeah, the
Yes,
Romulan sub commander who was, I think his name was it Navak? I think he was giving Garrick a hard time the whole time, and he
right,
was keeping him at a distance because obviously he was a changeling, and with Odo there, he was didn't want to get too close because he didn't
right,
want to reveal himself. But yeah, he made sure that Odo and Garrick escaped. But because of him, he had always been feeding information to the Dominion. They knew that the
right.
invasion was coming, so they were able to
Exactly.
evacuate the planet and prepare a little surprise of their own for the combined task force. Like it was
Yeah.
something on the order of like when the Dominion came out of the nebula or whatever. They were
Or behind the
outnumbered like
planet or
5 to
something. Yeah.
yeah, they were outnumbered like 5 to 1 or something like that, it said, which it was a combined Romulan, Cardassian task
Cardassian.
force, and they were still outnumbered 5 to 1.
Right.
That just shows you that, the Dominion has an incredible force,
Right.
at their disposal. Yes,
Right.
and as I'm reminded here, Colonel Lovac was that, duplicitous Romulan's name.
Right.
Or I guess
Not
not duplicitous
Romulus.
Romulan because he was a changeling, so yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Impersonated by a changeling. There you go.
Yes. We don't know if there ever was a Colonel Lovac. For all we know, that's a made up that was something that was made up by the changelings. We never
I
saw
guess that's
a
always
Lovac body.
possible. I guess
Yeah.
it's always possible, but I always figured that it was always an impersonation. Someone was always impersonated and replaced. Is that
I
not
mean, that's
accurate?
that's the way
Or
we had seen them do it. Like obviously that's what they did with Bashir. They just replaced him. But there's nothing to say that they can't just be the person,
right,
you know. We have no reason to think that they could never do that.
right.
So,
You
but for
know,
infiltration purposes, it makes sense to replace someone because that person already has the access versus
yes.
having to come up with a whole
Started
new
from
person.
scratch. Yep,
Yes.
yep. This reminds me though that with Dr. Bashir having been put, temporarily replaced, the fact that at the end of the season we didn't have any sort of reveal of any other saboteur during the midst of the fighting that went on was
Mhm.
interesting. I mean, it's not impossible. Maybe the changelings can't commit, enough people to
Yeah.
be they can only commit a few number of people to go out and actually do that. And the Dr. Bashir replacement changeling, he died. They were able to stop his nefarious
Yeah,
plan
they
just
blew
in
him up.
time. Yeah, for him to die. Like he went into the sun. Like he was gonna blow up the
Uh,
sun.
I guess technically he blew himself up because he had rigged
Yes,
the shuttle to explode,
while he
and
was
they
on it,
yeah,
but
and
they
they had
contained it.
diverted they diverted the shuttle from the sun. So the shuttle
Right,
still blew up, but it was far
right.
enough away from the sun that it had
Those
enough
runabouts, man. We've
impact.
gone through a lot of
Gone through
runabouts.
so many runabouts, man. So many runabouts. I
Yeah,
mean, yes, we were counting there for a minute. We had the Ganges, the Yangtze Kiang, the Orinoco, the Rio Grande. Those are the four that I can remember just off the top of my head.
right.
I'm sure there are others.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, because we lost one in the episode where O'Brien takes Nog and Garrick to the other station. The
Oh yeah, Empok Nor, that was recent. Yeah, and
yes,
we barely got to see that running about. I mean, it was just
yeah.
enough to get them there. And then like the
Bye
next
bye,
scene, it
boom.
was not only was it floating away, but it blew up later. I was like,
Yeah,
man, I mean, y'all just can't keep them for anything. Good
yeah.
thing the Federation doesn't worry about money because they've got to be expensive. They just have to be, you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The poor runabouts, man. They take a lot of abuse, but
And
um,
and it's important to note the distinction here of the runabout versus the typical shuttle that we had seen in Trek so far. The runabouts are basically mini ships. They can
yes.
do just about everything that any ship can do. They're
Right.
just on obviously a smaller scale. So you have a smaller
Right.
crew complement, whatever. Typically, you see 2 to 4 people are able to operate them, but they've got everything else. They've got living quarters, they've got the replicators, they've got weapons, shields, a high-powered warp engine. They are ships. They're
Right.
just small.
Right.
Whereas most of the shuttles that we saw beforehand, limited warp capability, typically didn't have much in the way of weapons or shielding, and they
Right.
were really just for getting you from
Transportation. Yeah.
yeah A to B. That's it. The runabouts, on the other hand, you could launch long-term missions with them,
Yep.
all kinds of stuff with them. So the fact that the station has 4 of these and then obviously gets way more than that because they keep
Yeah.
blowing them up or
They have a
losing them
standing
or
order.
crashing. Yeah. I mean, they don't even the quartermaster must not even question it at the Starfleet shipyard. Just like, well, it's been about a month. We better send 2 or 3
Just to get
shuttle,
there on time. Yeah.
yeah, 2 or 3 runabouts to Deep Space Nine. By the time they get there, I'm sure they'll need them.
Yeah.
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 What are you going to call
Uh,
this one? I don't know. Blow up A, blow up B, blow up C, because they're just going to keep destroying them.
yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
and somehow they promote Cisco to captain. I mean, again, the resources department should have been like, "Y'all are sending him another one? Seriously?"
Well, sir, he's on the frontier, as Dr. Bashir said in the premiere episode.
Oh, yeah,
He,
the
this is the,
wilderness. This is the
yeah.
wilderness. Man, yeah. It was ridiculous the number of shuttles that they lost, but,
Yeah.
and, it's funny that they kept doing that considering Bajor was right there, and
Sure.
Bajor did have its own, ships that granted they weren't as powerful or whatever as a Federation ship. But when it comes to some of the things we saw them using runabouts for, those little ships that the Bajorans had would have been perfectly fine. The fact they didn't like co-op some of those and be like, "Hey, we're going to run some of these, you know,
Well,
BS
wasn't in
missions."
season one we had Kira get Dax into one of those old rickety things and it crash
Okay, so
landed?
that was a old school fighter. I'm talking about like the little, little transports that they were running back and forth between Bajor and uh the station or Bajor
Yeah.
to any of the planets they were doing,
Let's take hours
trade.
apparently.
Well, but I mean, still, for the in-system stuff, they could have used those instead. But no, everybody had to hop in a runabout and then go blow it up or crash it on something or whatever. Like, all the way back in what was that, season 2, when they crash landed on that moon with Kayapaka that killed her. As far as we know, that shuttle is still there because
True.
they crashed and they said that the shuttle couldn't take off again, and O'Brien and Dax had to come and rescue them. So they came in yet another runabout to beam up our three survivors.
Yeah.
So that other shuttle is still there.
Man, and they're like still dying but living again, right? That's how that
Hmm.
planet worked. Prison
As far
planet,
as
you
we
couldn't
know,
die. Yeah.
that's the other thing about that Star Trek is also exceedingly good at never coming back to do any kind of follow up. It's just never heard of again. Kaiopaka is dead, but not dead. No one went to go visit her ever again. No one cares. Check on her.
Especially Kira, who
Yeah,
loved Kaiopaka. You don't
right.
go visit?
Now I get sort of why they may have kept this silent from like the greater Bajorans, right? Because you want your people to progress and move on. They've got to, elect a leader who is there with the people. And Kaiopaka had a very strong following, so if people knew she was still alive, they probably wouldn't have, voted in anybody else. I can get that, but again, Kira, for all of her dedication and devotion and for how much Opaka meant to her, the fact that she never went and told her that, Belial was dead, you know, or just to check on her progress. Maybe she had made those groups that were fighting there, maybe she'd finally gotten them to accept peace and spirituality and they could look at a different way of living. Any kind of follow-up whatsoever. Nope, not the Federation. We were like, okay, we escaped. Bye. We're
Yeah.
never coming back here. You
Right.
were terrible. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
This.
just I wish they would follow up more with stuff.
Yeah. Well, this whole idea, because it was in the Gamma Quadrant that Kaiopaka was lost,
Hmm.
because they were traveling through the Temple of the Prophets, to see the other side of the wormhole. I wonder how the Bajorans are taking on a religious level the fact that the Temple of the Prophets is now spouting out worships from a hostile alien race.
Hmm.
How do they approach that? You think?
Well, so I mean, I feel like they'd probably do it a lot like we do. Certain religions do other things. I mean, this could be seen as a test. The prophets are sending through something that is going to test them, and
Hmm.
how the strength of their resolve, how they meet this test, is the important thing here. Not, oh my gosh, I can't believe our gods are doing this to us. This is your time to rise. This is your time to, show your mettle, basically.
Right.
I think that's how they view it, and especially when you are. Um, Interpreting things with the emissary standing there who is also fighting these things, and
Yeah.
he is your spiritual leader here and interpreter for your god. So if your interpretation is that your physical spiritual leader standing in front of you is telling you to fight these things or to resist these things, then I think that's how they review it. Now that kind of gets muddied up a little bit when you've got somebody like Kai Wynn, who is so into her own power and ability and so forth, and how much she challenges Cisco in every turn. But yeah, I think that's how they would look at that.
Right. Yeah. Of course, I have to mention that that's what Cisco, he as the emissary, had that episode in the middle of the season where he tells the Bajorans not to join the Federation.
Oh
Bajora,
yes,
but Bajor must stand alone, which is, of course, seemingly antithetical to everything that he would have ever really truly advocated for. He would want them to join the Federation, and had up till that point, until he gets all these visions. He's kind of compelled to keep looking for the lost city of whatever it was. I forget.
Bahala,
Yeah, and
Bahala.
to say that, yeah, it turns out that the prophets are indicating this is not a good time. I mean, not maybe in the future, but not
Yeah,
now. Which of course is pertinent to the end of this season, where the Dominion attack and the Federation knows that they're technically outmatched, and so the Bajorans can't be fully protected by the Federation, and so our Federation crew has to evacuate and turn the station back over to the Bajorans, who turn it over to the Cardassian Dominions at the end of the episode.
mhm.
Which,
So
yeah,
so
man,
so that
season 6 will
episode,
start interesting.
yeah. So like I said, season five was great. When you look back at what you were getting here, it give you a lot. It's really great. That episode what you're talking about with Cisco and the visions, that was Rapture, and he um, was struck by the exploding holodeck console and begins having these visions. And ultimately, yes, he sees that if um, the Bajorans had signed the treaty, which would have brought them into the Federation at that time,
Hmm.
then, as the vision says, a plague of locusts would have descended upon Bajor and wiped them out. And so
Right.
Bajor must stand alone, he says.
Hmm.
And this is something that comes back to us towards the end of the season, when once again, the Bajorans are poised to sign a non-aggression pact treaty, whatever, with the Dominion, which is something that they would not have been able to sign had they already had joined the Federation. And now that we see that this war is mounting, it's all the more important that Bajor be able to stay out of the fighting and continue to rebuild, even if that is under the yoke of Dominion overseers.
Right.
So, yeah, that episode, Rapture, was one of our Cisco heavy episodes.
Yep.
Um, where we see Avery Brooks. I mean, it's not just again Cisco, but Avery Brooks doing a lot here to convey a particularly what I felt was a particularly difficult storyline, which is this kind of spiritual mysticism in the midst of a sci-fi background. Sci-fi has never really handled religion well. For people who are religious, I know that is something that's kind of a turnoff when it comes to embracing sci-fi. And the fact that Star Trek has tried many times to tackle it. And in this episode, despite some of the other missteps that it may have, I feel like they do a pretty good job here of not not letting us fall down that well of questioning the mysticism so much.
Right.
Now you're more of
Yeah.
a spiritual person than I am, so what was your take on that particular episode?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the Bajoran religion, as we mentioned before, is very different than Christianity in many ways. But this fictional religion has a lot in common with other fictional religions.
Mhm.
And what was great about that episode in particular is it's an episode where he embraces this role that he's been given,
Yeah,
and
we've
he
seen him
doesn't.
struggle with this role of emissary a lot,
Right.
and now here we are. He is fully embracing. You're correct, but go ahead.
Yeah, and he's not embracing it in a religious sense per se. What's interesting, and what's good about it is he's not taking a mystical angle in the sense of I trust blindly in the prophets to this or that. he is still a rational person making rational decisions, um, but he allows for things that he doesn't understand to inform him. He allows the visions he gets, the he's compelled to find the lost city to search for it, but he does so in a very rational way. He goes into the hollow suite and he gets the pillar picture and he starts comparing it and figuring out what the missing pieces are and
Yeah. He
this and
uses
that.
the science and tools at his availability to discover the thing. He's very rational with it. I understand what you're
Exactly.
saying there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's he never comes off as someone who is, I guess, the stereotypical trope of the religious person, the religious nut, the the person who drinks the Kool-Aid, hook, line, sinker, takes everything without any sort of self, any or sort of thoughtfulness, any, anything like that. I mean, Kai Wynn is a great example of someone who has actually. I mean, if you take the optimistic angle that I've taken, is actually changing because Kai Wynn is seeing that Cisco is the emissary, and therefore she has to respond to that in a certain way, and so that encourages character growth. Of course, your perspective is that she's actually a deeply manipulative
Yes.
person, and
Yes.
so she doesn't actually. Um, she's
Well,
just using the emissary to protect herself if anything goes bad. But
and
sorry,
so
go
now,
ahead.
well, since we're on the subject of Kai, I would like to, explain that a little bit more because if you look at the context, one of the things that Kai Wynn says to us quite early on is that she's never actually had an orb experience or been able to commune with the prophets, something to which she wants really badly, and she's very jealous of the fact that Cisco, this alien, this non-believer, has such a intensely intimate relationship with her gods,
Right,
and that they're not just giving him visions, but they're directly talking to him in certain instances. And she's never really had that. So she, for a person, she kind of comes off, she definitely has a fanaticism about her, but she kind of reeks of more of less spiritual leader and more politician. She sees religion as a means to an end for her own power and ambition. And she
right,
uses it to kind of, draw others who, are maybe uncertain in their own faith. She draws them in and she utilizes them. It's like she utilized that one woman to attempt an assassination on Vedic Burial.
right,
She, and again, and she was intensely jealous of Burial, not just for his popularity, but for the fact that Burial also had orb experiences, had talked with the prophets and so forth. This is something that she was not able to do. So I really think that a lot of her issue stems from the fact that, from her perspective, the prophets, I don't want to say turn their, like, I think she would phrase it as had turned their back on her, but it was more, it just seemed like they weren't interested in her. She didn't
yeah,
seem to offer them anything that they hadn't already seen time and time again, that greed and
right,
avarice. And the only thing that I can really draw on for that is think of what they did to Zek when he went into the celestial temple. They changed him and they made him into this, you know, humanitarian, for lack of a better word for Ferengi.
mhm,
But for whatever reason, they chose not to do that with
Kai
Kai
Wynn.
Wynn. Like, think about it. They had the ability to completely change Zek's entire personality and outlook on life, culture, everything. But they never took even the remotest interest in Kai Wynn to do anything of the sort. And they could have.
Yeah. You know what my theory is, and this is the response to Vincent in the chat talking about he thinks that Cisco was kind of taking a leap of faith when he said that Bejor should not be admitted to the Federation. And to be fair, when he comes into the room where they're having the discussions, he comes in all sweaty and
Yeah.
he's kind of ranting. So he does come off as like a religious
Kind
zealot
of a
in the
lunatic.
scene.
Yeah.
But Yeah, but what we know about the prophets as these alien beings is that they are beings outside of time. And so I imagine what happened in the example you just gave of Win versus Zek is that um, the prophets, I imagine, are kind of more observers in a lot of ways than they are active participants in a lot of like things that actually occur, because they don't live in time. They don't live in time as we experience it. So
Mhm.
they don't change things through time per se. If they change anything, they change people and their perspective. And Kai Wynn is not someone who cares? She doesn't matter. She is actually unimportant. Zek, ironically, because he's unimportant to the prophets and what they actually are doing, if you will, if they are doing anything, as in just observing and kind of shepherding the Bajoran people, I imagine for if the prophets were experiencing anything when Zek showed up, it was kind of like oh, we can mess with his personality by giving him a broader view of time. By giving
Mhm.
him a broad view of time, it changes his perspective on money and profitability versus philanthropy. And so for him, it was just kind of a little experiment. Whereas with like Kai Wynn, you're right. Like she's unimportant. She's not interesting. We've seen it a million times. Um,
So so when
None of
thinking
it
about,
makes
I
any
know
sense.
I know I just said that about them shutting her out, and even in the chat here saying they shut her out. Is it possible, because you just brought up something that I didn't think about until now, since the prophets don't perceive time the way that we do, and seeing the importance that they place on Cisco, is it possible that one of the reasons perhaps that they did not commune with Kai Wynn is because they recognized how important it was for Cisco to have this kind of adversary in her and to bring her along? So maybe that's
100%.
why all along they never spoke to her, because from her perspective it was her whole life, but for them it's, you're not important now, but you will be to this other person who's even more important. But that
Yes.
person will not be the person they are without you being
Exactly.
untainted by us. So
Yes, that
that's
I
why.
100% believe that's the case. In part because I believe that's my own personal belief with like God in perspective. Like, how can God be all knowing and yet there be free will? Well, the prophets are kind of all knowing and yet somehow allow the Bajorans and Kai Wynn and Cisco to make decisions and they inform them. But how do you wrestle with that? I think that it works in the sense that yeah, Kai Wynn is exactly where she's supposed to be as someone who can't communicate with the orbs. They don't need her to. Her
Mhm.
role is fulfilled without
She's,
that
yes,
being necessary.
she is fulfilling her role without their influence.
Exactly, without any
Okay.
direct influence. And the only reason they influence Cisco at all is because that is, again, they live outside of time. That's what happens. They don't
Right.
do it in the sense that they are making decisions and changing
So
things because they want to change time. They live outside of time. If anything, they just change people by changing their perspective of outside of time. It's a catch twenty
so they're
two.
not,
It goes
yeah, so they're not
circular.
directly, so you would say they are not directly necessarily influencing Cisco so much as they are showing him a different potential, and they still leave it up to him to.
They change his perspective, and it's like when Cisco says Bajor must stand alone, he's not saying that. I would say that he's not saying that because they have to. The prophets have ordained and have said and have
Right.
commanded. That is literally what will happen. I have seen that that is what will happen, and I'm communicating that, which is ironically also fulfilling the very thing happening, which is just that's outside of time. That's how cause and effect are when they're outside of time don't mesh properly, and that's how it works in this situation, which I think is a lot of
Mhm.
fun because I love Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan loves messing with time stories, and I love time travel stories that we've mentioned. I like to get I get as I've said a million times, I get very into the nitty gritty of storylines with time travel. And so I actually like the idea that the prophets are actually kind of doing time travel right, as I would perceive it. They aren't changing it. It always was what it was. but the fact that they are outside of time still has some sort of effect on. It's like how does that make sense? It just it's like a catch 22. It's a paradox. It's I love that. That's what I think is
Okay.
fascinating by time travel stories. So,
This is the part of
whew,
this
that was
time
a lot.
travel stories. Yeah, this is the part of the time travel stories that I hate. Um, when you try to get to the explanation to make it make sense, you
Yeah,
know. I can think of I think probably the most recent time travel explanation of anything I saw was in the Marvel movies, of course, when they
yeah,
try to explain how they can go back in time to get the various stones that they need and so
right,
forth, and how they remark on how when you go back and you make a change, it alters these various timelines and time streams and so forth. So, yeah, yeah, the timey messing around. Oh, yeah, not always a fan, but it is fun sometimes to think about how you get to certain points, and it's so great because I think that's one of the what I find time travel stories frustrating. I think that's one of the great things about them is that obviously since we have no way to prove any of it, it's always fun to see someone come up with a new way to explain time travel potential and
right,
how it can work out. And for as long as Star Trek has existed, um, I don't feel like they've been too heavy-handed when it comes to time travel.
right.
What would you say? Like in your experience,
Star
can you
Trek, they've
recall?
been
Yeah, do you feel like you've seen a lot of time travel
well, they've done it a number of
episodes?
times in this season. Even they did the one where the ship gets they crash land on a planet and their descendants are from 200 years of like they time
Oh
traveled
yeah,
back
I
200
forgot that.
years.
Children of Time. I forgot that episode.
And then we had the two time cop guys show up and ask
Trials and
Cisco questions.
Tribulations. Trials and Tribulations.
Yep.
Yes.
So they have done it a
So
number of
that's two.
times. Yeah, and then of course we had the two-parter. I think it was season 3-ish, where they go back in time to Earth before all the,
Oh
he has
yeah,
to,
past
yes,
tense.
yeah, he has to
Yes.
be a person. So they've definitely done it a number of times, and every time they've done it, I've commented on time travels as stories. And I mean, it's such a fascinating idea that I think any sci-fi show has to at least consider. Excuse me, consider it, especially a show like Star Trek. Um, I think the most compelling version of a story that uses time travel is what if your very actions of going back in time actually are what caused the thing that you're trying to say undo. Like say you're trying to save
I think that's the
JFK from getting shot, but you going back in time is what causes JFK to get shot. Or let's say you know that that's the case, that you going back in time is going to cause the very things that you don't want to have happen, but for some reason that's still the better option. And so you're actually like, let's say you're going to your death. You know that you die when you go back in time because it's been recorded and you're going to your death and you know it. I don't
wait
know.
a
That
minute. I
that's
saw that movie.
which one?
That movie. What was it called? And it's got the guy Gerard Butler's in it. And there's like a he's like a archaeologist or something. He's got a series of students and they're studying medieval England, I think. And one of the things they uncover is a giant stone sculpture that was
Right.
placed over a tombstone,
Right.
and it's this man and woman who were buried together. And the man, they were all talking about how the man kind of looked like their teacher, but he was missing an ear. And then at some point they all go back in time and they fight in this rebellion or whatever, and he ends up getting his ear chopped off, and he realizes that he's the man buried in the thing. And there was the woman that he was close to, but he didn't want to get close to her because he was supposed to be going back to the future. But then he realizes that he's the man because of the ear and whatever else, and so he ends up staying behind. I can't remember what the name of that movie was called, but it was quite an interesting film. I'd like to watch it again, but yeah, that's exactly what happens.
Right.
And it's kind of Back to the Future too, to a certain extent, with Marty McFly and everything. When Biff steals the almanac and goes back in time and gives it to his younger self, and so
Mm.
then it's
He
he
alternates. He
alters the
changes the time.
timeline.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
But then it's like, okay, he altered the timeline, so he changed it. That's what alter means. He changed it, changed the future, but then the future in which his old self stole the almanac no longer existed. So how would he
The
have gotten to a
grandfather
point?
paradox.
Yeah.
There you go.
How would he have
Yep.
gotten to a point to have stolen it
See,
if he had already
my
changed the future?
answer, and I think I've said this before, my answer to the grandfather paradox is that you can't kill your grandfather, no matter what you try for whatever reason. And it's not, maybe you will just decide, you know what, I don't want to actually kill my grandfather. And therefore, the paradox unparadoxes. It's just that you don't ever kill him. But you can't kill your grandfather because that would mess up the timeline. That would, I think I explained it as like like a like a loop on a tie, like you're tying a loop and it cuts itself off and it flips, like it just
Hmm.
goes out of existence. That's how I explain the grandfather paradox: is that you can't kill your grandfather. Something will, the cosmic events will not allow it to happen in whatever is necessary
Hmm.
to happen. Um, I know we've gone off a long tangent there,
I
but
mean, that's what happens when you go on time travel stories. But yeah, hmm. I've never really sat down and tried to totally break down a time travel scenario because they just make my head hurt. And
I'll just summarize it this way. I think I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Harry Potter, Book Three, Prisoner of Azkaban, the movie as well. They do it right. When they go back in time, everything they do actually conforms to what happened the first time, and actually brings about the very events that they experienced the first time around. For example, the Patronus that he sees the first time around that gets rid of the Dementors, he casts it. He hadn't been able to cast it the whole book, and then he realizes that he had cast it when he experienced it the first time to save himself. So the second time he does it, he realizes it was him to cast it. So he successfully casts the Patronus charm, saving his previous self, etc.
I still feel
And
like there's a
also,
hole there.
possibly, I don't know, but for me it works. And then I'll just mention that that's also why. So J.K. Rowling allowed slash wrote a play that takes place like 10 years after the series ends, and they've used time travel, and they don't do it that way. They go back in time to change things. And I'm like, no. In Prisoner of Azkaban, you didn't time travel to change things. You time traveled to make things happen the way they were supposed
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
and
So
so you
their
messed
time
your own
travel
logic up.
reinforce right. Their time travel reinforces what already happened versus going back in
Exactly.
time to change something, which is where things start to
Right.
fall apart. Okay.
Exactly.
I
Yeah,
think I kind of
exactly.
in the words of a famous Trek captain, I hate temporal mechanics. So this is yeah,
Yeah. Vincent, thanks again for the quote there.
yes.
uh,
This is exactly why I don't talk about this stuff because it's just yeah. And
yeah.
there's not enough coffee in any nebula to get me
Oh,
to a
I
point
I
where I
love
want
it.
it.
I'll talk about it. I think it's fun, cause and effect. How would it work? Um, but man, that's been a
Mm.
long tangent. We have so much else to talk about. Let
I
me
know.
ask you this:
Yeah.
should we make this a two-part Dark After Dark episode? Because there is still so
Ooh,
much to talk
yeah.
about, and we're already an
Actually,
hour in.
we totally should because there is lots to talk about before we really get into season six. And it's important that we talk about these things because season six and season seven, I mean, obviously they're it. You know, season six is the penultimate episode season. Then we have, you know, obviously season seven there. So yes, I think we will do that. I do want to say that the final season of Discovery is well. Actually, before we get into any new Trek stuff, anything else that you want to say on where we are so far in our recap of season five and so forth?
Um, I mean, this season had a lot. We haven't talked about the fact that Odo went from being a non-changeling to back to being a changeling again, and his
Hmm.
relationship with the scientists who kind of raised him. His
Hmm.
relationship with Kira is revealed to be
Hmm.
romantic to her.
Well, don't start
Um,
running through it now. Just say we've
yeah,
got a
well,
lot
I'm
to talk
just
about.
okay. We got a lot. We got to talk about Dax and the relationship, the romantic relationship with the Worf, and all kinds of
Ugh,
stuff.
Dax and
There's
Odo.
so much. Yeah, no,
I
that
didn't want
wouldn't
to think
work.
about that.
I know.
No. Okay, well, so yes, we will get to all of those things before we actually dive into season six. The final, now into the new Trek stuff. The final season of Discovery is airing right now. You can watch all those episodes and all the rest of Trek on Paramount Plus. I am enjoying this season of Discovery so far. Um, um, I don't have anything else to say about it right now. Maybe we'll make that another thing and talk about that at some other point. But hopefully, other people are watching it and enjoying it as well. There's still no update on the heretofore unnamed Star Trek movie project that is supposed to be in the works. I know they are still working on the Section 31 movie. The casting for that has been complete and announced. So if you're curious about any of the actors besides Michelle Yeoh who are going to be in that movie, if you just go online and search Section 31, you'll find it. A lot of people are going to be in that movie, but doesn't seem like there's going to be anyone from any of the Trek shows. So if you're looking for Picard cameos, Strange New World cameos, or Discovery cameos, none of that has been slated as of yet. Now that doesn't mean it's not going to change, but I'm just saying the way that looks so far, it looks like they're trying to go as far away from those as possible.
Right.
So yeah, there's that. Strange New Worlds that season, the next season is slated to come out next year. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And I really think that's it. So next week we'll be giving you our part two of our recap of season five. We'll also be talking about the Expanse a little bit, and we may or may not be announcing yet another contest. Who knows? You will have to tune in and see, you know. But yeah, other than that, guys, thank you so much for joining us yet again. You can find us and follow us anywhere you happen to do your social medias, except for X, because no. Um, all of our episodes are now available fully for streaming on any podcast platform that you happen to use. I happen to do it on Spotify. So I hope you listen, give us a listen. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please send them our way. Until next week, guys, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.